Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. Think about your closest friends for a minute. Have you ever found yourself saying, maybe, I just don't know them anymore? Or why is it so hard for us to get together? Perhaps you've told yourself that you're a bad friend. Like, they're my closest friend. I don't know why this is so hard. Or another example would be when you're spending time with one of your closest friends, but maybe you don't live near each other anymore. And so you're showing up to their house. It's the first time you've been in their house, but they've lived in it for a year. And a neighbor comes over for dinner one night, and they seem to know where everything is in that friend's house, and you have no idea. And you're just sitting there thinking, but I'm their closest friend. If you've ever had any of those struggles, any of those doubts about your closest friendships, then today's episode is for you. Many of the models of friendship that exist out there are what I would say very linear. It's this idea that you get closer and closer to someone's inner circle. Or perhaps another visual would be that you're climbing up a mountain, right? It's like step after step after step. And at a certain point, this friendship is at its peak. They're your closest person. And when you're at that peak, you're probably doing a lot of life together. You are connected in a variety of ways. You're spending time doing various things. You're talking about different subjects. But as we all know, if anything in this life is a constant, then that constant is change. So what happens when we reach the peak or the inner circle, and then something about either our circumstances or our friends' circumstances changes? That is why I created my Wheel of Connection framework, and specifically the two types of friends in the framework that I call present and historic friends. Now, present friends are the people that we are currently doing life together with. They are the friends that we are connected with in a variety of ways, on a variety of topics in our life. I think a lot of people would think of that peak or that closest friend as a present friend. Now, when life circumstances change, those are the people that I would call our historic friends. And at one time, we were doing life together in whatever way, shape, or form. But after this big life change, after a maybe move across the country or entering medical residency, moving away from your hometown, whatever the big life changes, in this season of life, you are not doing life together as much anymore because of those circumstances. It's not really that feasible right now for whatever reason. And that leaves you mainly connected to this friend by your beliefs, right? Like, we are friends. I care about you. I show up for you. I trust you. Our memories, all those beautiful memories we have with our friends, and the details that we know about each other. We keep all of those, even though we are not necessarily integrated into each other's day-to-day life. We have all this knowledge and care for one another. And the fact that we are not as active in the day-to-day of each other's life isn't a bad thing. It's just different. There isn't that consistent flow that you once had. Our historic friends might be childhood friends, college friends, old best friends, but then one of you moved across the country. Maybe it's a super close friend of yours. You're still living in the same city, but you are now, again, in medical residency and you have barely any time. And when those life shifts happen, I think a lot of us grapple with, how do we maintain this peak? How do we stay this close? But when we allow this concept of historic friends, I think what we're asking is, how do we integrate this change? Because many people are out there trying to force it to stay at the peak all the time, but that's honestly not very fair to our friendships. I think we actually do more of a service to our friendships when we allow them to breathe in their new form, when we adjust and let go. And that's not to say these friendships could never come back to a present friendship. I mean, if we're using the medical residency example, that person could graduate, and I guess maybe you need a few more years after that. But at a certain point, you might have more time. And if you've maintained a really solid historic friendship, it might be really easy for you to integrate back into a more present friendship. But maintaining a solid historic friendship probably means adjusting your expectations and lessening them. It means spending a lot more time appreciating what is there, all that history, all that time together, and any time you are getting in the present with each other, which is probably more limited. Now, I've had quite a few people reach out to me about this concept. They want to hear more, or this concept is honestly, a lot of people have told me, has created a sense of ease in their life. They're not trying to force their friendships anymore. And one of those people is today's guest. Now, his name is Joseph Suttner, and we met recently, like a year ago. But we realized very quickly that we actually have a ton of connections. It turns out that Joseph went to high school with Michael. We both went to the same university at the same time, but we were in different programs, so we really didn't overlap or know each other. And then in the past year, Joseph and I met because he is the executive producer of New Day Northwest, which is a morning TV show here in Seattle on King 5. The more that I've gotten to know Joseph, not only have I found all these shared connections that we have, but I found that we both have a real shared interest in friendship. As you'll hear in this episode, friendship is a central value in Joseph's life. And so upon meeting me, I think it has led him down a path of even more curiosity about his friendships. And I'm just really excited to share our conversation with you today. Before we dive in, now that I've told you about present versus historic friendships, you might be thinking about them and think like, wow, this sounds really sad, or I don't want to admit that my friendship isn't at its peak. It feels like a downgrade. I've had people tell me all of these things, but I would say keep listening to the episode. I hope that you walk away, like many people do, with a new appreciation for your oldest and closest friends. That this episode provides a positive way to look at them, appreciate them, love them, and be present when you are spending time together. So with that, let's get to today's episode. It's always fun to come on your show and talk about friendship. And I just really appreciate you actually, like, you're very invested in friendships. Friendship's a very big thing in your life.
I didn't really realize that as much until I think I started talking to you and then like producing your segments, thinking about friendship as in like a story sort of mode, that I really started thinking about it even more. And now here we are.
Well, I love that I gave, I don't know, a new appreciation for friendship in your life. That's a fun thing to hear.
It's true.
So something that was a really big eye-opener for you was my wheel of connection and my concept of present friends versus historic friends. And basically, for anybody that's listening, present versus historic is because I was looking at other people's models of friendship, the ways we categorize them, things like that. And so many people just talk about how close you are to someone. And while I think feeling very close is very important, it's just harder when some of your closest friends aren't as present. They're more historic. Right. They live far away. Do you want to talk about when you heard that concept, what the maybe aha moment was for you?
Yeah, I had not seen your friendship wheel yet. I was just watching one of your Instagram stories, and you just were like casually mentioning the idea of present versus historic friends. And I was like, whoa, I've never really thought about it that way. I've always kind of, when you and I talked before about friendship, kind of just like in a linear sense of like kind of friend to really good friend, just kind of on that line. And so when I started thinking about that and thinking about who my historic friends are, I realized that I kind of had thought about them differently than I maybe realized I was. I hold them so close to my heart, but I feel like 5-ish closest friends don't live in Seattle. and none of them live in the same city either. So I'm constantly going back and forth to see all them because I love to travel. So it's fun for me to go visit all them. It gives me a reason to take a vacation. But, once you kind of realize maybe that your historic friends are most of your closest friends, then you kind of think about like, well, why have I kept it that way for so long? Right?
Yeah. I mean, part of them being historic in my mind is you're really leaning on this. They're my closest friend. I love them. I care about them. We have so many memories together. Like I want to be around them, but you're almost fighting yourself because they live across the country. They require a plane flight. They require back and forth phone calls where you miss each other and you're like, oh, I'll call you tomorrow. I'll try this. It's just harder. It's more effort than it is when you live close to someone or have some way. I mean, you can live far away from a present friend, but you've kind of really ingrained some sort of routine that you can depend on. And then we're fighting ourselves.
Yeah, it's true. It's also interesting to think that present friends and historic friends can also be the same person too, which was also something I hadn't really considered because I do have some of those as well. So really just once I started to think about friendships in this way where you can sort of like look at a wheel and think about how these people relate to your own life, it just made me have a little bit more awareness, I think.
Have you ever spent much time thinking about the messages that you are taking in about friendship? Like those off the hand anecdote comments. Friendship is rare. Be sure to hold on tight to those close friends. Good friends are few and far between. Or maybe you're hearing more of the variety that is like, real friends should be easy. That should be an easy friendship. It's a lot of shoulds. What we should do to be a good friend, to have a good friendship, to maintain this peak. Should. But what it doesn't account for is the realities as an adult of our responsibilities, our other goals, the variety of people that we are now connected to, responsible for, partnered with. It's a lot of shoulds without a lot of acknowledgement of the complexities of life. And I think when you look at all these shoulds, it can lead us to feeling a lot of guilt and shame, right? If friendships are rare and I was a good friend, I would call more. I would plan more trips. I would check in on them more, but I don't do those things. Therefore, I'm probably a bad friend. Or if circumstances have changed in your friendship and the messages you're believing are, if it's a true friendship, it should be easy, but it does not feel easy, then you're left being like, oh, well, I guess that was never a true friendship. Instead of acknowledging the realities, which are, this is one of my dearest friends, but life's really complex right now. This is a true friendship, but I am juggling a million things at the moment. And if we really allow the honest answer instead of what we should be doing, it allows us to be a lot more honest about the state of this friendship. And the hope is that it allows us, when we're being more honest, to realize that like at one point we were doing life together. When we were present friends, we had this ebb and flow of our day-to-day life where we ran into each other maybe multiple times a day. And we don't have that now. It's a lot more active energy to maintain this friendship. And my energy in this season of life is limited. And therefore, I'm going to give myself some grace. Nothing is wrong with this friendship. I can appreciate all the beauty it is. I can appreciate the moments I can still spend with this friend. But I can also acknowledge that it is different. Different is not bad. Different is just different. And there is beauty in this historic friendship and in the season that it is in. And it allows us to get away from this model where the only way to grow a friendship is for it to be closer and closer and closer, or stay at that peak and muscle our way through keeping it there. And instead, we can just allow this new version in our current season of life. We can be realistic. We can be honest, and we can simultaneously tell our friends, like, I love you. I care about you. I want to be there for you as much as I can. And in this season of life, I'm really limited. We're going to need to set some different expectations. We're going to need to create some new traditions. We're going to find new routines as a friend. And we're just going to appreciate all of those for what they are instead of being so focused on what we can't do in this season of life. Now, there's a second thing that Joseph mentions here at the end of this section where he talks about how somebody can be both historic and present. And I want to just expand on that a tiny bit. When you look at the wheel of connection, the people in your wheel of connection are always moving. Nothing is stagnant. Nobody is stuck in any one category. So if a present friend of yours moves across the country, you may fall into this pattern where for a couple of years during that friendship, you are historic friends. I mean, hey, maybe even in the middle of those 3 years they live across the country, they take a 2-month sabbatical. And during that sabbatical, they call you multiple times a day, every day. And you're like, wow, we really feel like present friends. And you might be there. Who am I to judge? It's whatever you think is happening. But then the understanding for you is when they get back and they're re-entering their job and time is super limited again, it may go back to feeling like historic friends. And that can be whiplash. It can have you thinking like, gosh, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with this friendship? But when you understand historic versus present friends, you can be in a space where you can just see like, oh, this is the shift and we're here now. Our time is more limited and that's okay. And maybe after these 3 years that they've moved away, they move back across the country and they end up in your city again. And you quickly fall into a rhythm where you're planning weekend get-togethers and barbecues and dinners and run clubs, and you're back to that present friendship. So people in your life can be both. They can move around. None of this is stagnant. It is always moving. So what did you decide to do when you realized that so many of your closest friendships were historic friendships?
So at my job, I think on average, I probably meet more people in a day than most people do, just by the nature of like all these people coming through the station every morning. And I think subconsciously before, I had been kind of closing myself off to maybe trying to make new friends or just allowing that to happen in my life because I'm like, well, I only have so much bandwidth for these people in my life, but none of them really live here. And so I think kind of around when I sort of met you, I was starting to think like, wow, you know, we're coming out of the pandemic. I think a lot of things changed during the pandemic friendship wise. Plus we're all just, I mean, well, everyone's getting older, but you know, millennials are moving into that kind of next phase of life of having kids and stuff. I don't have children. All of my closest friends now do. And that kind of changed during the pandemic. So now that we're, I mean, some people would say we've been out of it for a long time. Some of us would say we haven't been out of it as long, but you know, we've been out of it for a good amount of time now. And so I think there was just some resetting of like, who am I hanging out with now and why and when and all that stuff. And friendship is so relative. I think some people are like, oh, you have so many friends. You might feel like, well, I don't have as many as maybe you think, or, you know, things like that. And so it just kind of opened my mind to like, well, I think I have more room for friends in my life, like presently.
Yeah. The historic versus present friend piece of the wheel is just so interesting to me because most people have never thought about it this way. We're really just told like, collect these friends, get super close with them. They are your people, stick with them forever. And we don't realize that maybe we have this hole, like you're acknowledging, of people who live close, people who could just get together on a Friday night that don't require a plane flight, that are in a maybe a similar season of life and don't need childcare on a random last minute thing. There's so many factors that can affect this. And some people get really sad because they realize that maybe these friendships that they hold super close aren't what they thought. And it's not that they're not your closest friends. That's what I was trying to tell people. Like there's so much beauty to historic friendships that you can sit around and talk about, oh, that time in college, or they know all these layers of you. And so you make a big life change and they're like, I'm so proud you finally did that. And they can say it in a way that a newer friend wouldn't understand. But I do think the present friendships for so many people, and we can talk about that in a second, for so many people are so important. And then when you realize you need them, there's this moment of like, oh, wow, I kind of do need to put in this effort to fill this space I have. And actually, great thing to acknowledge, you didn't even necessarily pick to have this space,
Mhm.
right? Because
Yeah.
your friends maybe moved away, your friends chose to have kids, and then you end up in this place where you're like, oh, wait, I didn't change anything.
Well, and also, a big thing that happened during the pandemic is a lot of people moved, and I moved out of the neighborhood I had lived in for so long, near so many people. So then once, we're coming out of this, and I'm like, oh, I have always lived in an apartment. Well, now I live in a house. So now it's like a different sort of vibe. I don't live in, Capitol Hill, Seattle's, busiest neighborhood. I live in a little bit of a quieter neighborhood that's a little more residential. I mean, it's still very close to Capitol Hill, but it's still, it's a different vibe. And so even when we were talking about little things you can do of don't always wear headphones when you're walking around your neighborhood, I mean, that's a real thing. If you're not self-aware enough to realize that how you look when you're going for a walk impacts if someone's going to talk to you or not. If I'm wearing sunglasses and wearing headphones, is someone probably be like, oh, hey, neighbor, I don't know. It's you look busy. I don't know. So things like that.
You look like you're just on your own little self-walk versus being out in the world intending to, maybe casually meet someone or have somebody that lives a block away, even just think to themselves that person walks by me all the time. They must live in the neighborhood. And maybe the next time they're say hello and you look more approachable. I was smiling about the headphones thing because I've mentioned that on the podcast multiple times, and people probably listening and wait, people are actually doing that? They sure are.
Yep, it's true. Yeah. So I'm trying to be more aware of that. And just, I do feel like I have a lot of present friends currently. I don't want people to be like, oh, Joseph has no friends. That's not what I'm saying. It's more of just the realization of you're putting into thinking about certain friends. You can still have that, but keep your heart open to new people. And that is something I realized I wasn't really meaningfully doing. I think it's important to think about things like that. When you talk about that linear, I don't know, how do you call it? It's the opposite of your wheel. It's a line way of thinking.
Yeah, it's just so many people talk about friendship as if you get to know someone and you become friends with them. And then it's kind of like you're going up to a peak. You want to reach this peak, and then they think that it's stayed there, when in reality, it doesn't. Things change and friendships change, and therefore you kind of have to build a new peak and a new version. But I don't even think that this linear model, as you're saying, is serving us, because not every friendship follows the same trajectory. Peaks look different. Some friendships, their peak could be a neighborhood, what I'd call a familiar friend. And that's valuable, even though it's not your closest friend.
Right. I was thinking about the linear aspect of that. Do you remember way back when we were in high school, when MySpace was a thing and you had to rank your friends in a linear way? I'm this is so friendship. You shouldn't rank things like that or just think so black and white, I guess. So that's why your people wheel was really interesting for me to think about. And I think anyone who is listening to this podcast, if you have not looked at that wheel graphic you have, highly recommend.
We'll link it in the show notes. We've linked it in many podcast show notes. It's on my website. It's on my Instagram. There is no right way to build your wheel of connection. And in fact, your personal wheel of connection will likely look very different in different seasons of your life. So I want to give you 2 examples of how this might shift for you, or now you might be seeing this in your friends' lives. The first one, let's talk about someone who's maybe hyper-focused on their career right now. So they're spending a lot of their time and their energy at networking events, connecting with their coworkers, traveling for work. So for this person, a lot of their wheel of connection energy is going to be in their formal community, their acquaintances, their familiar friends. That is the part of their wheel that is currently taking up a lot of their time and their energy. And let's say that you have been close friends with this person for quite a while and things feel different now. They feel less present, right? They are very committed to work. It's taking up a lot of their time. I mean, I can think of a personal example of this. It wasn't somebody necessarily focused on work, but I had a friend who went back to school. So I guess maybe some people might say oh, well, you shouldn't be so focused on your career. But if we look at it from that school aspect, we want them to graduate. Their program is just kind of all consuming. And when that happens, maybe me as a present friend, we end up in kind of this historic friend role for a while. They just don't have the time to invest in this friendship. And for them right now in this season of life, the gold standard of a close friend is someone they can go long stretches of time not speaking to because they are so focused on work or on getting that degree, they don't have the capacity. And then let's say that this person maybe graduates, or they get a couple years down the line and they realize, I don't really want to be all consumed by work anymore. And so they readjust their life and their priorities, and they reach out and they start reconnecting with those historic friends. And you find yourself a few months down the line being like, wow, we are really more present friends again. A second example would be someone who is expanding their family and maybe having a kid. So let's say that, again, this is another scenario I've been in many a times. My friends have a kid. I currently don't have any kids. So when they have those new little bundles of joy that I love so much, even though I love them, even though I am so close with them, I, as somebody who currently does not have kids, cannot fully understand what their life is like. And their time is already stretched so thin by the responsibilities of being a parent. And then you add in the fact that I currently can't provide a very specific type of support they need. If they call me in the middle of their night and they're like, should I take my child to the pediatrician tomorrow? Have you seen this before? I probably have not because I don't have any children. And so what they need is to invest some of their time into joining a parenting support group, connecting with other parents, starting to develop friendships with those people. And that time has to come from somewhere, and it might come from my friendship. And so I can allow this friendship in this current season to fall a little bit more into a historic friendship because that allows my friends space to get the support that they need. Doesn't mean I'm not their friend anymore. It's just not quite as present right now. And down the line, when they do have those friendships, when they've developed those, and maybe when they have a little bit more time or capacity, we can work to reintegrate as a little bit more present friends. I really hope that you can see this, again, not as a downgrade, but honestly as honoring a friendship that has been there for you for an extended period of time, that has supported you maybe through a specific season of your life, and allow that friendship the space it needs within new life circumstances. I created that wheel because with my story, like as you've heard, Joseph, my story, I really think that all of our connections work together, that so many people just focus on friendship. And when we don't focus on, say, community and family, you're missing a piece of the puzzle. I mean, the community piece is just what you're talking about with your neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you moved, you were in a different neighborhood, same city, but like a different neighborhood. You're trying to kind of ingrain yourself in that community. And even if you're not the most active and you're not at every neighborhood HOA meeting and things like that.
Yeah.
Just having that familiarity is worthwhile, but you move and that community piece is pretty empty. And like you have to rebuild that. So this is all constantly changing for all of us. That's the point of the wheel.
Yeah. And I don't think a lot of people think about relationship, not just friendships, just relationships in general in that sense.
I mean, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that based on my job and this podcast. And
yes,
I mean, honestly, just the feedback I hear from people. And it was one of my biggest frustrations. Like I said, it was just everybody separating friendships from the other types of connections. I mean, the other thing is it's kind of like a funnel of some sorts, I guess. You meet people out in the world somewhere. And over time, those people become your friends. It's not like you just go out and meet someone and they're instantly your friend. So
right.
If you're really low in that maybe community piece or the familiar friends piece, then people aren't going to trickle up. Or, I mean, if we use you as an example, you were saying, you meet more people than most do in your job because you do. You meet
a lot.
Yeah, you must meet 15, 20 people a day, if not more.
I mean, it really depends on the day. And what is interesting about that is that I think in most people's jobs, you can meet a lot of people in your job, but it's typically like they're in your field. So you kind of have that, in common with them, or you meet a really huge range of people, but you don't really talk to them. Like I used to be a person that worked at Costco. So obviously you meet a ton of people, but you're not really communicating with them as much as more of like, here's how much your stuff costs. I mean, so, when you came on the show, I sat and talked with you backstage for at least like 10 minutes before you went on the show, just, to say hi and like make sure you're ready to go on the show and everything. So yes, in that sense, it's like a formal community of just a lot of different people, which has been really fun for me over the years. I mean, it's been almost a decade. So
I mean, I'd say you're tapping into kind of the bigger formal community of Seattle and the Pacific Northwest, because not only do you meet the 3 to 4 people that are in the slots on the show, but so many, I come alone. I don't have like a whole team that comes with me, but there are often people that are back there that have, there are often people back there that have 2, 3, 4 people with them that you never see on set. They never leave the backstage area, but you still might meet those people. And the whole point of me telling this story is so many people are out there not seeing any value in these connections. And you're meeting so many. So I get that it can be overwhelming. But when you see the value of just like, man, I get to meet a lot of people. I get to hear about what they do or what they're passionate about, right? You learn something a little bit more than what you were saying at Costco, where it's just a person. You don't even know their name necessarily. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the people that don't appear, like one shout out to Rachel out there if she's listening. She is someone that I became really good friends with, a present friend through work. But she was someone that you would, not see on camera. She would bring all these people to the station. So I think right around that time, I'm like thinking, I have room in my life to have more friends. And just once you kind of realize like, oh, duh, like, you are a familiar person to me. We see each other all the time and we have a lot in common. Like, why aren't we friends? No,
I mean, that's exactly it, right? Is you have this bigger, like formal community situation happening just naturally because of your job. And then seeing, as you're saying, like seeing the value of these people, and you don't have to befriend all of them, but it's this moment of like, wow, okay, well, we've already kind of tapped into the initial, I know your name. I know some things about you. I see you regularly. Yeah. Do you want to grab coffee? Do you want to get a drink? Do you want to join me at this show or however you and Rachel started hanging out?
Yeah.
But when you see the value of that, it's easier to tap into it, because so many people, I think, when they find themselves in a place where they maybe realize that a lot of their friendships are now more in that historic place and they want to add to their wheel, they think they have to start from scratch.
And that's very daunting.
Yeah, it's like really, it's a lot. And it's like there are probably people around you that you might enjoy connecting with. And they may become present friends and they may never become present friends. But you're probably not out here with no one.
Right. And that's so interesting too, because a lot of it has to do with perspective on how people are, because I mean, I honestly think of myself as an introvert, but I have such an extroverted job. And when you have to be like in work mode and portraying yourself as morning producer, lots of coffee and morning stuff, people are like, wow, he is so much a people person. But then, in real life, I'm kind of like, oh, I'm not really that extrovert. I feel like I'm an introvert. So part of that is you got to recognize that about yourself too. And like, when you do meet someone and then you want to go to that next friendship level, well, then how does that move forward? Because since I'm the way I am, sometimes I think I wait for other people to be like, hey, we should get drinks. Like, well, why don't I suggest that to someone sometime? I mean, I do at times, but, just things like that, where perception of how other people are versus how you are when it comes to friendship is also something I think about a lot.
So when I'm trying to meet someone, this actually happened this morning. When I'm trying to meet someone, I actually tend to shy away from the drinks or the coffee, because I feel like there's just so much pressure to sit with this new person and just talk.
And stare at each other and talk.
And stare at each other and talk. And sometimes that's fine if you kind of know what you're going to talk about. I mean, you and I got together, we had coffee, but we had some sense of like the majority of our topic is going to actually be about this podcast episode and things like that. But it did lead to some space for me to be like, oh, what part of where you grew up did you grow up? And this, that, and the other thing, right? We both like learned
We
some stuff
surprisingly
about
have
each
a lot
other.
in common with each other.
We do.
Yeah.
We do. Joseph went to high school with Michael. We both went to the same college. Like, yeah, we found all this overlap that we didn't even know
we
we
did
had.
not know each other in college.
We
sadly.
did not even though we were there at the same time.
Yeah.
But we discovered all that. Most people, if I really don't know them, I kind of shy away from the coffee or the drinks, like I was saying, because it's all that pressure. And I will look for an activity. So this morning, actually, the day I'm recording this, a friend of mine invited me to cold plunge in the Puget Sound with her. And I know that sounds terrible to most people, but I was like, yeah, let's go. And she invited another friend who I've met once before of hers, but I don't really know her. And we were literally walking out to go walk into the water. And I mentioned that I love to go to like spas when we travel, but I don't really go around here. And she's like, oh my gosh, what about the Korean spas? Like, do you want to go? You know, and I've been to the Russian spa and I've been to this spa, and she was throwing them all out. And I was like, you know, I really don't know you at all. I really don't. But like, yeah, let's go.
Let's give it a whirl. Yeah.
Let's give it a whirl, because it's like an activity, and then it takes a little bit of pressure off, and you can focus on something else and just like slowly get to know each other and not have to feel like you're spending an hour staring in this person's eyes trying to figure out what question to ask them next.
Right. Especially kind of, you know, whatever you do in life, if you don't really feel comfortable talking, especially with people you don't know, it's like a muscle that takes practice. I mean, you've done stuff on small talk before. Man, the amount of small talk practice I've had in 10 years is just...
Oh, you are like a PhD in small talk. You have to be with your job.
Ooh. Yeah. I mean, you just got to pretend like you know something about everything with, you know, depending on what you do. So yeah, that's not easy for everyone. And it's not always easy for me either.
Yeah. Well, and I think small talk is actually even more pressure when you are sitting across from someone that you both have admitted, like, hey, we'd like to get to know each other. Like, now there's almost pressure versus when you're just randomly talking to someone that you're probably never going to see again.
Right.
You could say something kind of wild and then just be like, okay, well, I'm going to go get another drink.
See you never. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope we're not both invited to this holiday party together next year, but I guess we'll find out.
Yeah. No, totally.
So with your historic friends, I mean, we talked about friendship this whole time, but the historic friends, has realizing that maybe they fall in this historic category, has it changed any of your expectations on yourself when it comes to those friendships?
Yes, because I've thought about this. Something in common that some of them say to me, like when I'll be visiting them or whatever, is that, like they say, Joseph, like you're Joe, that's what I went by when I knew these people, when we became friends, is that, oh, you're so good at keeping up with friendship where other friends are not. And for a while, that made me feel kind of weird. Like, oh, am I just weirdly loyal in a way that like these people are not to me? But, you know, we all come at friendships from different ways. We have different things going on in life. And I do value friendship a lot. And I don't think of it as me like going out of my way to like stay in touch with you or talk with you. It's just because I really feel like we are those friends, and, you know, maybe we haven't even talked in like months, but I feel like I could pick up the phone and call any of my historic friends and it just immediately pick up from wherever we left off, or even not with something where we left off, just something completely random and new. Like last week, I'm like on the phone with one historic friend, Lindsay, shout out to her as well, about something completely we had not even really talked about before. And we talked for like an hour on FaceTime about it. And lots of good advice back and forth. Friendship, lots of good friendship, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. What did they say to you? That you are really good at keeping up. I think so much of that, right? When we have historic friends, I believe that a lot of what keeps the friendship together is the belief that like we care about each other. We are friends. We are, you know, we trust each other. We appreciate each other's advice, whatever these beliefs are that you have, which most of us have never even thought of. I hadn't really thought of until I came up with this concept after a million hours of reflection. But because of that, and because you value it, you're then prioritizing, like reaching out regularly, checking in regularly. So for somebody who maybe has those beliefs, but doesn't prioritize it the way you do, they may stretch longer chunks of time and not reach out.
Mm-hmm.
For somebody who maybe really appreciates friendship, but doesn't really believe in those beliefs anymore, like there's such long periods of time where they went from, I appreciate this friendship to, do I appreciate this friendship? Or
Mm-hmm.
I really care about this person, to, do we care about each other?
Mm-hmm.
We've all been in that place where we just like, I have always believed in this friendship, but now I don't know. It doesn't feel quite that way. All of those can be reasons people prioritize the actions less. And so I think your mix just makes you really prioritize the actions probably more than most people do.
Yeah. Well, and what you just said about like, just because you have known someone for a long time and were friends with them doesn't make them a historic friend, I don't think, right? I mean,
No,
it's its own category
yes.
of like, you know, people that are really close to you. So yeah, I don't have, I've met a lot of people over the years, but I feel like I had a close knit of historic friends. And I think for even someone to tell you something like, wow, you're really good at keeping up with friendship, like that's kind of like a vulnerable thing to say too, of like, because are they saying, well, sorry that I'm not keeping up or whatever? I've never felt like any of my historic friends have failed me in any way. I don't have that feeling at all. So.
Well, but I think a lot of people do, especially when you get to that historic friend place, that's where a lot of like shame and guilt builds up, where you start to feel bad about how long it's been. And then you start saying things to yourself like, well, they're my closest friend. Why haven't we talked in 2 months, 3 months, a year?
Mm-hmm.
And you really start to feel guilty because a lot of people, I think, tell themselves like, well, they're my, again, that linear model, they're my closest friend. What is wrong with us? And so my hope in bringing this concept of historic friends in is people to realize like, this is more, it's not more effort. It's more like stop and go motivation, because you're not present and like seeing each other all the time. You really have to be aware that it's been a while, which is probably that prioritization, like spending some time thinking about it and not just zooming past in your day-to-day life enough to take the action, because you can't depend on the next random Friday hangout or the next time you run into each other here. So it's kind of this catch-22 of either like you have friends that are historic friends and you accept that they are in that place and now you just talk less and that's okay. And what you have is so special and so beautiful, but you let yourself off the hook for feeling like you need to talk to them nonstop because the effort it requires just maybe doesn't work in your season of life right now or whatever it is. Or it's maybe kind of doing what you do and realizing, hey, this is a really big priority to me and I'm going to put it in my calendar or make a point of calling them every time I think about them and not second guessing it or whatever people want to use. But at the end of the day, you're not a bad person, I think is what I'm trying to say. Like there are reasons, they're not you, but people, like there are reasons that this feels harder, even though they're your closest friends.
I think it's actually really like a beautiful place to be in when you get to a point with someone who you've been friends with for like, oh my gosh, nearly 20 years now. Of you don't have to stress about like, oh, we haven't talked in a minute, but like you don't even stress about that. You just know that that friendship is there. I think that's a really fun place to be personally. So
that makes me so happy. I'm over here putting my hand over my heart because that's what I hope people see it as. That it's not lesser them. It's not a downgrade. I mean, people have used all sorts of words. It's not meant to make you sad. It's meant to give you like a new appreciation for these friendships and a little bit of acceptance for the circumstances of the friendship and how you're acting within it. And that's, like you're saying, a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. Like I said, when I met you and started actually thinking about friendship in other than just like who my friends are, but like what friendship is, it really was very like eye-opening and like honestly kind of heartwarming to me once I then started to like look at my friendship wheel and kind of start to categorize people in it. maybe I should have studied psychology instead of broadcasting, I don't know, because just, some of that human interaction is just very interesting to me. So,
well, I'll talk about human interaction with you all day, every day, obviously, anytime you want. Joseph, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I know that you're behind the camera all the time, but we don't necessarily talk about your life. And this has just been really great. If you were going to leave anybody with, now that you talked about how much you love friendship, if you were going to leave anybody with any thoughts from this episode, what would you have them take away?
I think it would just be, don't stress about the amount of friends you have or what kind of friends you have. I mean, just live in the present, live your life. And if you're wanting to make new friends, like, put some effort in and think about it and just go do it rather than just sitting at home and thinking about it so much. That's it.
That is some great advice. I mean, we all need to remember, myself included. I've been chronicling ways I've been trying to fill some spaces. I'm not immune to this. We all go through it, and we're all going to go through it so many times. So I think it's just a skill set. And if we can all see it as that and develop it, it'll be easier. Some final points on this episode. In this episode, Joseph talked a lot about his historic friends being his closest friends. And I definitely think for a lot of people, your closest people are the ones that might end up being in that historic category. But I can think of some examples of people who were maybe defined friends. So a coworker you had for an extended period of time that you got really close with, but you didn't really develop a friendship outside the office. That would be that kind of a defined friend. Where one of you left a job, but you still get together once a year or catch up randomly, message back and forth a little bit. So although it might be that present friend, a historic friend, I do think there are cases where maybe kind of defined friends, or even honestly a full formal community ends up falling more in that historic category. Just something for you to consider. I also want to acknowledge that if you're out there saying to yourself, I don't think I have any historic friends, I want to offer you just a couple things to consider and reflect on. Number one, you might not feel like you have any historic friends because you're still categorizing people who are actually historic friends as present friends. And I hope this episode left you with the feeling that there is so much beauty in historic friendships, and there is nothing wrong with considering someone a historic friend. You might also be in a situation where you haven't experienced a lot of change in your life. Perhaps you've lived in a really small community where most people stay there. So people just continue to be present. I could see that happening for some people. Another reason might be that when transitions happen in your friendships, you're getting really caught up in the shoulds. And instead of allowing the friendships to shift into a historic friendship, you're just automatically placing them as a past friendship. It's either they stay at their peak, they stay present friends, or you don't want them in your life anymore. And that just might be something to pay attention to. I really want to thank Joseph for coming on here, for talking about his friendships, for being a part of this community, for spending time reflecting on friendship and connection in his life and being willing to share that with us. I think that the more we can all do this, the better off we will all be, the better our friendships will all be. Like I've said before, I can't do this alone. So I'm just so grateful to Joseph for being a part of this work with me. And I'm also grateful for Joseph, if we're being honest, for his consistent invites to come on New Day Northwest. I will be back on the show again, I believe, fingers crossed, the day that this episode airs. So it's always so fun to go on there and share about friendship with the New Day Northwest audience. My final note for you about this episode is I hope that you walk away from this and give yourself a little grace. If you're really feeling the weight of all those shoulds around your friendships, or you're feeling frustrations about how friendships have shifted and changed, I hope you can allow more. I hope you can allow your friendships to change. I hope you can allow the shame and the guilt to float away, and that you can really just embrace this concept of historic friendships. Because when you do, you're more focused on what is there in your friendship. You have more appreciation for the time you can create for each other, for all the memories and the history that you've created together over the years. And in doing so, you just hopefully won't be so hard on yourself. That's my hope for you. So with that, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle at it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.